One of the things that I find so compelling about astrology is that it gives language to our relationships with these different forces internally. Yes, Mars is a planet. Yes, Mars has significations within our chart, but Mars is also our capacity to push our will out into the world. One of the things that's beautiful about astrology in the practice of it is that it's about these timed cycles. It's lifetime time management software for when to spend time thinking about your ability to be assertive and to push your will out into the world. And not just that, but when Mars is retrograde in the sign of Leo, like it is now, thinking about how your will and your assertiveness or lack thereof is expressed in certain parts of your chart in certain areas of your life. I almost think that it doesn't really matter if something is happening just as a contemplative practice. Astrology gives you a path into saying, okay, I'm going to spend the next 10 weeks that Mars is in retrograde in Leo and in Cancer working with my Mars energy, working with how I relate to it, using it as a deepening tool for my insight, my life practice, my reflective practice of integrating the world and myself and thinking about all of those things. With that little preamble, I'm going to be talking about the Mars retrograde, the questions that it offers, and each of the rising signs and where the Mars retrograde is happening in their charts. As you can hear, my voice is bad. I am sick. I am also a toddler mom, and I can't really choose when I record these things because it's opportunistically when my kids are out on adventures and I have some time alone. I apologize for that. One thing that is really important to know about Mars is that Mars is the planet that actually spends the least amount of time in retrograde. Stations retrograde the least frequently of all of the planets. And so we spend less time in our lives with Mars in retrograde than anything else. And that's because Mars only goes retrograde every 27 months for 10 weeks. And when you compare that to, let's say, Pluto, that is retrograde like 44% of the time, that's a really small proportion. And even Mercury, that's going retrograde quite frequently and going retrograde for about 3 weeks a year, that's 3 weeks a year. We've got 9 weeks there. So Mars is really on the low end of retrogrades, and we can think about what that means in terms of our ability to stop, pause, think about what we're doing, have these real moments of frustration where we're at a fork in the road, deciding what is worth fighting for, or where we need to stop the action that we're taking, reassess, and move forward in a different direction, having earned some kind of new knowledge in the process of Mars retrograde. Mars retrogrades test our resolve, and sometimes they show us that we're doing the wrong thing, that we chose the wrong fight, that we are definitely going to die on this hill if we don't withdraw and change our tactics. So that's something to really face. This one is so important for 2025, not just because it lasts for the first 2 months of 2025, but because this Mars retrograde is happening opposite Pluto in Aquarius. And so we're really getting a sense of how our kind of Leonine era is going to respond and confront Pluto in Aquarius that will spend the next 20 years opposing the sign of Leo. Now, the sign of Leo is the sign of the hero, right? Of the individual standing against the masses, separating themselves, going off on an adventure, transforming themselves, and then bringing that gift back to the collective. We've got Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, that explains the whole hero's journey, the archetypal hero's journey, and what we're doing when we're doing that. And that's beautiful. And we love Leo people, right? YouTube is a space for Leo people to perform their own little worlds in full view. Social media is about the profile, how we put ourselves forward, what we say, how we portray our lives through our own artistic way and our own performance. This is all Leonine. This kind of seeking for authenticity and seeking to perform the power of the moment is Leo. Pluto in Aquarius is not about the power of the moment. It's about the power of the past to affect the future. It is about intentionally, almost compulsively, stepping outside of what's happening right now and looking at the big picture. So, stepping back and almost watching things from the periphery, as the sun is the center, right? The sun that rules Leo, that's our center. Saturn, that rules the outer boundaries, is standing on the periphery of our human life. And in traditional astrology, ruling Aquarius. We have two oppositions between Mars and Pluto as part of the retrograde in the signs of Leo and Aquarius. We actually have three. The first one already happened, but that was in between Cancer and Capricorn. And those signs have a very different story. We're passing the mantle from Pluto being in Capricorn for the past decade and change to Pluto being in Aquarius for the next couple decades. This Mars retrograde is really bringing it in through these interactions with these two signs. Mars in Leo is taking a stand against is saying, this is what I believe in, this is what I care about, this is what we're going to do. I'm thinking especially of the assassination of the insurance CEO as being this very Mars and Leo standing up against our Plutonian autocrat dictators deciding whether we get healthcare or not. That seemed like this real expression right as Mars was stationing in Leo of this energy against these Plutonian systems that are so beyond our ability to even understand, and that we can spend a great deal of time feeling helpless in front of. I think for the portions of this retrograde that involve Mars in Cancer, we really connect with that feeling of helplessness. Mars in Leo still has this brazenness, still has this bravado, still is going to believe it's possible to assassinate our foes because the integrity of what is in our hearts is so strong. Mars stationed at 6 degrees of Leo. So Mars is in our Leo house and will be there for another month until the beginning of January when it retrogrades back into Cancer. The station point usually presents an initial problem. It articulates it really well. This is connected with some other astrology that's going on, which is that we got the cazimi of the Mercury retrograde, the midpoint of the Mercury retrograde, that provides some clarity around whatever we were working on with Mercury. And we get that moment and Mars stations at the same time. We have this initial problem. Something in what we're thinking, something in what we're doing is not working, and we have this Gordian knot to figure out during the process of this retrograde that will involve a sense of existential problems and frustration and just takes time. We have 10 weeks from December 6th until February 24th while Mars is actually in retrograde. But then we have time from February 24th until May 1st when Mars leaves the post shadow to demonstrate the work we have done and the reflection that has taken place during the retrograde. So Mars stations at 6 degrees of Leo is going to be moving retrograde right around Christmas time, starts building into this exact opposition with Pluto. That will be this week. The last week of December and the first week of January is that opposition. We get Mars's opposition with the Sun in mid-January, which is the midpoint of the retrograde. Oh, and just before that, Mars on January 6th is going to retrograde back into Cancer, and then we spend a great deal of time with Mars in Cancer. Mars will station direct in Cancer on February 24th at 17 degrees, and then begin moving forward again. Mars will re-enter Leo in mid-April, clear the shadow of the retrograde in May, and finally leave Leo and enter Virgo on June 17th, which will be Mars's first new sign since it entered Cancer in September of 2024. The story of this Mars retrograde spans almost an entire year, and it's already started. Mars entered Cancer in the beginning of September. We got into the pre-shadow in the beginning of October, built on those themes during the election, worrying about security, personal security, and now we're seeing the station as the year. So that's what we've got timeline-wise. This is going to make a lot more sense if we're looking at it in the context of charts. Now I'm going to be talking about the Mars retrograde based on your rising sign. You can check the timestamps below if you want to skip ahead, but I encourage you to listen to the ones for the significant people in your life, because you will be able to tell where they are getting triggered, or you are, and just have some context that takes the pressure off relationships and promotes understanding between people. Okay, so we're going to start here looking at Aries rising. With Aries rising, we have Mars stationing retrograde in the 5th house, the 5th house being the place of creativity, of joy, of self-expression. There's something in your voice that catches in your throat. What you're putting out into the world gets stuck by the silence of your audience, Pluto and Aquarius up here, by changing your audience, right? What Pluto is doing is transforming at a granular level the place where it is. You have Pluto in the space of your audience for 20 years, taking an existential view at the things that you are creating in your 5th house. This Mars retrograde is more significant for you because Mars is the ruler of your chart. So you have the ruler of your chart retrograde in your 5th house of joy and children. This can also have to do with topics of pregnancy, of raising children. This is about the things that we create metaphorically and literally. Mars is going to retrograde into your 4th house of Cancer, and that's where it's really bringing these topics of children into your past, your history, to confront your relationship with your family, your memories of childhood, your home that you make, and settling into that. It's digging up old stuff, bringing up old conflicts, and it's really having you wrestle with how to create a space of safety and contentment for yourself so that you have a solid foundation to express yourself in those leonine areas, in that leonine place in your chart. Okay, Taurus rising, the Mars retrograde goes from your 4th house to your 3rd house. In your 4th house, this is possibly having conflict with your parents, with the space where you're living, having people come up from the past, especially the family past. It can have to do with having to move or changing up your house to really facilitate. You've got Pluto in your 10th, which is really pushing you to step into your power and really spend the next 20 years. This is going to be a good chunk of your life learning how to hold power responsibly. Mars is doing this discovery mission in the fourth house of what still has cracks in it. Um, and what do we need to fix if we are having to put ourselves out in the 10th house in this way, put ourselves on stage, really take up space, not in a Leonine way. That Leo stuff we need to be secure of in ourselves, in our private lives, in our homes, so that we don't give a fuck what they think in the 10th house when we're out there, so that we're not super tuned into that. We might need to go to the third house. We might need to be building our communities and having that support built in the third house, having the safety of the familiar in order to do that. We might need to really connect with how we are feeling and thinking in that space before we can really assert ourselves in our homes, in our own stories, in the way that we need to. Okay. Gemini risings. This Mars retrograde goes from your third house, from your place of communication, from that solid rock of your voice, from your ability to step into the moment and to geniusly pluck the salient fruits of what's happening and express them to other people. That is faltering because your overarching theme, life principles, are going to change. Your sense of the world, your sense of the future will be completely transformed by Pluto transiting Aquarius. Mars has the words caught in his throat and goes back to Cancer in the second house in the search for security and a sense of safety. Sometimes that looks materially. Sometimes this looks being more conservative in how you are spending money and how you are sharing money, in certainly in how you are expressing your feelings and how your feelings and intuition fuel your action in the world. We're in a period of reflection with that. Nope. Cancer risings. This one is a big deal for you. Mars rules your 10th house and it's retrograde in your second house, bringing up real themes around work and what you do to make money. Maybe we are thinking about how we are investing our time and our resources and how we're showing up in those. It's going to retrograde back into your first house of personal identity, of this space of how much of a shield do you need to have in the world and how much of your sensitivity needs to be brought forth, right? Pluto in the 8th house is going through your secrets, is going through how you hold power and what you are devoted to in your intimate relationships, what your sense of what is yours and what you owe other people is happening. And Mars in Leo is really pulling that towards your sense of self. And it's going to reflect back onto who you are and how you come across. Cancer risings can be seen as very guarded and very sensitive. And Mars is really taking that to heart and making adjustments in the areas where maybe you need to let people in so that they can see you and be with you. And maybe you need to let your sensitivity and your deep intuitive knowledge of how to protect and provide for people out. Leo risings. Oh man. This is a tough one, my friends. We've got Mars in Leo, gung-ho with whatever you've been trying to do. For some of you, this Mars retrograde is going to cross your ascendant, but for many of you, it's not. It's going to remain in this kind of 12th house area above the degree of your ascendant and into your 12th house. This is really about how much of you comes out. Remember that Mars in Cancer is that feeling of helplessness, and it can be the feeling of being overwhelmed by your emotions and not really knowing what to do to free yourself or to sort them out. Mars stationing in your first house is, wait, I thought I was ready for this. I thought I was ready to step into this role, and maybe I am not. Can I show up in this way? Can I live out this new job, this new role that I'm taking on? Or am I gonna collapse into fearfulness? Mars also rules your fourth house. So this can have to do with location, how we identify with our family, especially when we're talking about the portions of the retrograde that go back into Cancer. Mars is wrestling with the demons of the family and how we're going to take a stand as an individual against them or not, and what we're going to do. You have Pluto in the seventh house really transforming how you relate to people, what you ask for them, what you demand from them. This can be pushing your relationship to a moment where it is at a question about whether it can transform, whether it can change form to measure up to who you are now and what you need now, or if it is going to have to die in order for you to be free of it. I wish you all the best with this. This is a tough one, for sure. Okay, Virgo risings. You have got the Mars retrograde from your 12th house of the stuff that you keep secret, the stuff that you lie to yourself about, the Leonine space in the shadows, your fear of taking up too much space or of leading with your ego, of putting yourself in leadership positions when you're not ready. And the joke on that with Virgo risings is you almost always are. You almost always are qualified because your care and attention to things means that you will go find what you need. So we have Mars stationing retrograde in the 12th house. If you have been spiraling in a sense of shame or really outside yourself, really acting in an unconscious way, Mars is stopping. It may be something going on with your body and a new sense of having to take care of your body and change the way that you're living your life and change what your daily habits are. That has you stopping and rethinking. And then Mars retrograding back into the 11th is figuring out who is really on your team, who is your friends, and who is your community. My dad once said to me, we have to start by nurturing the people that we want to nurture us. And that's a really salient phrase in this Mars retrograde journey for Virgo risings because Mars is being tasked with going back to Cancer, doing some nurturing, being held by the community, but also taking on responsibility, being the kind of protector or provider for the community of friends, for who is on your team. Now, I think the danger with that is taking on the emotions of the friend group or the team, especially when we've got Mars in retrograde in Cancer, and that can feel and look like helplessness. And so if you're feeling like you're drowning in the helplessness of the masses, no, you're a Virgo rising. You figure out how to fix stuff and then you show up and do it. If you don't approach it like that, like we have to start somewhere, which you're so good at, then you're going to have Mars in Leo that takes things on too aggressively and feels out of control and doesn't actually help you get it done. Mhm. Okay, Libra risings. This one goes from your 11th house to your 10th house. Have you ended any friendships recently? Mars stationing in your 11th house is really questioning who your supporters are, who really sees you and is on your team, roots for you, offers you support, holds the context for you to shine. And Pluto in your fifth is really questioning what you have to offer expression-wise. What are you creating for other people to receive? If you don't feel seen, in what ways are you not showing up? Are you not creating art or putting it in the right places? The place is not just the literal location, but it's also the social context. And Mars stationing in your 11th house of friends and supporters is if I am not connecting and I'm not feeling seen and I'm not with other people that are resonating with my authenticity, in which ways, let's spend some moments thinking about that because Mars is going to retrograde into your 10th house of your profession. This is a questioning of how you show up in the world, what you have to offer it, and what that looks like. And this is a big deal with Mars retrograding into the 10th house, right? This is probably going to be fairly uncomfortable because Mars is reconsidering what that is and what that looks like. And that is very uncomfortable to do. I'm surrounded in my life by Libra risings. Both my parents have Libra rising. They are working on retirement, and that can show up like that. You also have Mars as the ruler of your 7th house, the ruler of your relationships, your partnerships, your really strong one-on-one things. And Mars retrograding is questioning those topics and the roles they play in your life, in your legacy. That's going to be really interesting later on in March when we get Venus retrograde in your 7th house. As Mars is still moving forward through all of this big relationship year, big deal year in general for you. Scorpio rising, big deal. With the ruler of your chart, Mars retrograde in your 10th house into your 9th house. You just have Pluto move into your 4th house, right? So we've got this very angular transit going on for you, making you question the really big stuff. The 10th house, your career, your life's work, your legacy, having an effect on the 1st house because it's the ruler of the 1st doing stuff in the 10th, right? So that's your legacy, how you show up in the world, and what that means for who you are and who you think you are. And then being challenged by this 4th house, the context of your personal history, your relationship with your family, the story of where you came from. Questioning who you think you can be in the world and how much you can step onto that stage, right? Mars in Leo, your chart ruler, stepping onto the stage of your life is, okay, let's go. I am the hero for this moment because I am the counterculture. And when we're looking around at the world, this is the moment to step onto that stage. And yet, there are questions about whether that is worth doing that are posed by Pluto in Aquarius about the enormity of forces against you. Mars retrogrades back into your 9th house, into the place of the principles that you live by, into the place of the long view, the long game, the thinking about where true security comes from and how we use it. The interesting thing about the 9th house is that when Mars natally is in the 9th house, it has an almost dissociative relationship with will and aggression. Often that comes from having a lot of conflict in your childhood and not knowing how to process it, shutting down around it. And so you have to access Mars through the mind. How to interpret that within this transit is that we get Mars in the ninth house, really thinking like, okay, was that level of anger, was that level of stepping into my power really effective? Should I do it in a different way? Does it need to be more responsive to the emotions of other people with it in Cancer? Do I need to take a step back and really check in with my intuition around my values, around why I am truly doing this before I can step forward in the 10th house again? So those are some of the questions that come up around this. This is really about how you practice, what you preach, and how confident you are in the values that you preach to risk this opposition with Pluto and the sense of really feeling defeated and powerless, and what is worth even that existential threat in the context of your ego, not actual existential threat. Okay, Sag rising. This is going from your ninth house to your eighth house. We have Mars stationing in the ninth. I mentioned in the Scorpio rising video the kind of issues of practicing what you preach. This is really the one where you get to do that because Mars in the ninth house is standing in the pulpit, is the missionary, is sharing the good news, is sharing the message. And with Pluto right there in the third house, it is not landing because you are in a new context where your old principles, your old ideas, they just don't hit the same. This is the stop and read the room transit. I don't want to hear the talking points. I want to hear what you actually think. Pluto is listening to what your message is. This is a call to change that messaging. Pluto's going to spend 20 years in your third house, changing the way you communicate and who you are communicating to on a daily basis. Mars goes back into Cancer. Cancer in the eighth house is all of this sticky stuff. It can be your relational insecurities. This is your emotions. This is, okay, what do I actually think and feel? What do I think I deserve? What do I think fairness is? What does safety feel like? What do I care about? And how do I check in with myself in this private, intimate space to connect my voice and ideas with the truth? Because the eighth house is the uncomfortable truth. Making sure there's enough of that discomfort and that it's not just the discomfort of your audience, but the discomfort of yourself in providing something that is truly vulnerable and living close to your values through your devotion to your God or whatever term for God you prefer, right? This is about walking the talk. Capricorn rising, you've got eighth house into seventh house. This is about what is in your power and what isn't. This is about conflict in your relationships, conflict that might first appear annoying, that you might want to brush off and not take seriously and project onto the other person. But what is really them fighting for the relationship and effort in your relationship that has the ability to open things up for you and bring you into a deeper experience of self that you can only get through your close relationships. So if there's conflict showing up in your close relationships, if there's frustration, let your mantra be about that frustration as an invitation into deeper intimacy. It is a space to understand the limits of yourself and how much other people can assist you in getting into the sweeter, more spontaneous, more sensitive parts of yourself, even if it is deeply uncomfortable. Aquarius rising. We got Mars stationing retrograde in our seventh houses, in our marriage and partnerships, our besties, and how we get reflected. This is the potential for conflict, for not being authentic in our relationships, for not using our assertiveness and our will, for not stating what we want. Pluto is teaching us in Aquarius how to hold power in our bodies, how to be willing to participate. And Mars and Leo is really challenging us to participate in our relationships, to say what we want, to stand for something, to label things, for that solid sense of stuff. Now, Mars is going to retrograde back into the sixth house. This is our daily life, how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of our bodies. I think that part of this is the balance between caring for other people and caring for ourselves. And as Aquarius risings, with Aquarius in one of the mental health houses, we can be very dissociative. We can be not caring for our bodies. Mars in Cancer is giving us an opportunity to change that. Mars is going retrograde. I am very aware of this, as the seventh house can also be the place of client work, and I work primarily with clients, both in my mental health practice and in my astrology practice. This is a change in the ways that we are dealing with our clients, and then Mars going into Cancer, making sure that there's enough self-care, enough downtime that we can really show up for people, enough tending of the emotional life that in our relational context, we can step into the Leonine area and share with people. But I imagine that there will be a lot of conflict and opportunity to do that. And I think the danger with Pluto in Aquarius is that sometimes that can make us feel a kind of existential threat to our sense of who we are, either when our mistakes are reflected back to us or when we get in situations where we really don't know what to do. And we're asking ourselves, what should I do? What should I do as my authentic self? What should I do as my better self? And not being really sure. And I'm sure that there will be some helpless hand-wringing in that space with Mars retrograde in Cancer, wanting to not do it. Mars in the sixth house is the place of Mars's planetary joy. So that also means there's a lot of work. So we're doing a lot of emotional and mental labor, I think, with Pluto in Aquarius and Mars spending so much time in Cancer. And we finally made it to Pisces rising, with Mars retrograde from your sixth house into your fifth house. We have Mars trying to balance your physical health and your mental health, and the ways to which those are tied together, right? Physical health can be so important to mental health, but it can also become a behavioral addiction and another place where any mental imbalances, any perfectionism we have, or addictive qualities can get played out in that context as well. Mars is really making sure that we're taking care of our bodies in Leo in the sixth house. This can also be one of those experiences of signs that have the potential for injury during this, because Mars is stationing in the very embodied sixth house of illness and injury and kind of maintenance. So it might be a time for like our body for taking a pause and how much we're doing. Overall, I think this is sweet because in some ways, this transit is a little bit of remember to have fun because Mars is retrograding back into the fifth house of pregnancy, of children, of creativity, of joy, of play. And so it's going back there. That can be a place to hide with Mars in Cancer. And it might be a place that we are honestly annoyed if we're coming out of intense parenting and think we can move on and work on other stuff. And then we're having to spend significant time in the fifth house caring for things we have created. There can be a little bit of frustration there as well. That is what I have for you guys. Let me know how this transit goes for you. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel for more. I'm also available for personal and relationship readings. You can book them through my website. I hope you have a good Mars retrograde. I hope you find that inner strength, that inner resolve, and that the frustration only knocks you down temporarily. Have a good one, everybody.